What we observed with IPA Datamine 3 was that the way that campaigns were being created, constructed and delivered was more like conducting an orchestra these days than ever it has been before. We looked at over 250 effectiveness award papers right from 2004 through to 2010, and we categorised them into different models of integration as we saw the shift happening over those 7 years. What we found was that there were 4 different models of integration that we observed in looking at those 250 cases, ranging from a category where there was no obvious integration, where there was a lot of activity happening, or where there was a single medium, so there was no need necessarily to integrate across media channels. Then we saw advertising-led integration, where campaigns were ordered around a common creative idea, so where the look and feel of the campaign was very much the same. And that was by far at the start of the period of the cases, by far and away the biggest group of cases that we observed. So then there was the brand-led idea that the campaigns were orchestrated around, and actually we changed the term for those from integration to orchestration, because that was where campaigns were being constructed around a higher order brand idea, where they didn't necessarily have to look or feel the same because they shared this brand value. And so we felt that that was much more like conducting an orchestra than any of the other campaigns or categories that we'd seen. And then finally we've seen the participation-led orchestration, where campaigns are very much inviting consumers to be part of that campaign, and a very necessary part of it is the participation of consumers. So that's really the ultimate in terms of the move from integration to orchestration. What we've observed over the 7 years that we looked at for IPA Datamine 3 was that the focal point around which campaigns are unified is definitely changing. So in 2004, for instance, we saw that 66% of cases were in the advertising-led integration category. Now, by 2010, they were still forming a significant part at 39%, but they'd fallen quite a lot. And what we've seen is a shift towards the higher order brand idea, so the brand-led orchestration model, where that had moved from 16% of the cases to 39% of cases in 2010. So we'd seen a definite shift along the way. What we haven't seen so much is a big shift in the amount of participation-led campaigns. But I think we've got to remember that we're living in 2011 when social media has made participation a lot more of a reality and a lot more feasible for advertisers. And in 2004, Facebook was only just born, so it was never likely to be as obvious a route for advertisers to take. So I would expect to see more of that over the next few years as campaigns develop. One of the key things that we've looked at as part of the Datamine 3 project is obviously the measurement of effectiveness of these campaigns, because that's what the IPA Effectiveness Awards are all about. So we looked at each of the models and we looked at how effective they were across a range of different business metrics. What we found about the brand-led orchestration campaigns was that they were equally as effective as the advertising-led campaigns across a range of business metrics. Now, there were some differences in that they were better at customer retention, profit gain. So there were some of the subsectors within the effectiveness metrics that they were better at than others, but they were just as effective as campaigns that had preceded them. We looked at 250 cases, over 250 cases for the Datamine 3 project, and actually only 10% of those were participation-led campaigns. And what we found was that actually we've seen a growth in those campaigns over the 7 years, and we found more of them in the 2009 and 2010 years than we had done in previous years. So I would expect to see more of them as time goes on. One of the things when we talked to people about the campaigns, when we interviewed people, what they said was actually it's really hard to measure them in the traditional sense, because quite often you're doing things that either have a small reach or where you've not got a direct sales outcome, so it's really hard to measure, even with econometric techniques and things like that. So one of the things that our interviewees said was that they expect those campaigns to increase as people develop new ways of measurement and new metrics to measure success by. I think that the participation-led campaigns on the whole were successful against the objectives that they'd set for themselves, but sometimes they had set themselves some quite hard business metrics which they hadn't quite achieved. So in terms of the IPA measurement, we talk about measuring success in terms of very large business effects. Now, what we found was that the participation-led campaigns quite often demonstrated large business effects, but not very large business effects. So they were demonstrating effects, but it just wasn't to the same scale as some of the other models. And also what we found was that they were better at demonstrating softer or more intermediate effects. So things like brand fame or brand values. So they were better at those branding metrics than necessarily they were at the business metrics. What we've seen over the last couple of years is that the trend towards orchestration has increased because there's a multitude of channels that advertisers have to choose from, and it's no longer just a traditional channel. You can't even just talk about television. It's video on demand, it's sponsorship, it's branded content. There's so many different ways that you can talk about television these days, and so many different ways you can talk about the internet, print, that I think it's got a lot more complicated for advertisers. So actually what they do need is some way of orchestrating all those channels. And I think that's why we've seen the shifts that we've seen over the last few years.